And I noticed that if you tried to present the truth to them, they would get mad at you about trying to even present the truth. It's like they don't want to hear it. They're just so
Yeah.
comfort in the lie, they don't want to even hear the truth.
And it's interesting that you say that because with Martin Luther King in particular, after we have shown people who Martin Luther King really was, what he really believed, what role he played in the civil rights movement, the number one feedback that we get from people is, well, I accept all that and I see where you're coming from and you present a very good case, but Martin Luther King was still a good man. And so for some reason, and I think it's because of years of indoctrination and constantly peddling this narrative, people just refuse to step away from enshrining this man as a god.
Yes.
The first commandment is you shall have no other god before me. But for whatever reason, people insist on making Martin Luther King a god. People insist on making, you name it, Helen Keller, all of these people who we've been told are heroes.
Yeah.
We insist on making them gods. And as such, we don't look to the real God as it relates to how we ought to live our lives. And every time, the topic of race comes up, we always go back to what? Martin Luther King. And we wonder why we can't really move forward as a country.
Yeah.
Because we make man our God.
And I noticed that if people, how people put another man over them and make them their God, a man or a woman, but then if they find out one flaw in that God that they have created, they'll get mad at that God and dump that God real fast and become the enemy of that God that they supported. But then they'll go and find some other God to put above them. It's not like they say, well, I'm through with creating gods. I'm just going to be my own person. They just find another group, another God to put over them.
And we can't, and what you say is a very important point because when it comes to Martin Luther King in general, over the past 5 years, there's been a lot of information that has come out about his sexual deviancy, his affairs, and all these different things, his drug use. But we don't touch any of that information because we don't care about any of that. What a man does in private, that's on him.
That's right.
What we're looking at is what are the things that he said, and how did this contribute to either the positivity of Black America or the destruction of Black America. If you'll notice, from the end of slavery till around about the 1960s, Black America was doing very well, especially in the South.
Yes.
We like to believe that Blacks were free in the North and everybody was suffering in the South. That's completely untrue. To answer the question that you asked earlier about what are some of the things that I've learned. What we learn about the South is completely untrue.
Yeah.
It just is. We like to talk about how Jim Crow was oppressing Black people. A lot of that is nonsense. The fact of the matter is white people and Black people were increasingly getting along in the South. And the reason for that is because they believed in God. They weren't allowing the agitation of the Marxists and the NAACP to come and muck things up. And because of that, you did have a lot of success. And to the extent that you had Jim Crow laws, and this is another thing they don't tell us in history, a lot of these Jim Crow laws were already going away. A lot of these Jim Crow laws were falling off the books because they were economically infeasible. They were, just people just didn't want them. And so to the extent that you had a civil rights movement in 1957, you had the SCLC and the NAACP and these other organizations taking credit for what was already happening. And again, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to go on that rant, but
no, but that's
it's
true,
just.
Even now, man, when I tell people, I grew up during the Jim Crow era, but it wasn't affecting us. We worked hard, bought land, did our thing, and we knew that all the white folks around did not agree with the Jim Crow thing because it was about spiritual. It was a warfare between good and evil, and Blacks and whites knew that for the most part. And so, but when I shared that on my show, there are Blacks who get mad at me because they have been brainwashed to believe it was so bad in the South when it really was worse up north, because when I would go up north, that's when I saw the blacks and the whites fighting and black people crying racism or whatever they were calling it at the time. And it wasn't like that down in the South. I'm like, but they can't believe me, even though I was there. They don't believe that either. It's crazy. One thing that I didn't realize about Martin Luther King until years went by and I got older, I didn't know that they were ushering in socialism, because I didn't know anything about socialism and all that. But I didn't know that that organization was about bringing in socialism, controlling the people, other than freedom. I thought it was about freedom.
And that's another narrative that people just either ignore or just don't want to believe, is that on the one hand, they would recognize that, okay, Marxists and socialists had their hand in the civil rights movement. So they'll acknowledge that over here. But when it comes to Martin Luther King in particular, they'll say, oh, well, he was duped. He was fooled. He didn't know what he was getting himself into. He was a Christian pastor who people took advantage of. That's not true. He knew entirely what he was up to.
Yeah.
If you read his papers, he writes about the fact that at the age of 12, he rejected Christ.
Martin Luther King did?
Yep. These are in his papers.
Wow.
So he said that. And then not only that, but he said that by the age of 15, he embraced the liberal interpretation of the gospel full on. Another lie that people believe or are told is that Martin Luther King wanted to go to a seminary in the South to study theology, but none of these seminaries would accept him because he was a Negro. Completely false. In his own papers, he says that I embraced the liberal social gospel, and I intentionally went to a liberal school in the North because I wanted to get away from the South, because he really looked up to and admired the so-called talented 10th, W.E.B. Du Bois, and all of these atheist, socialist, black liberals in the North who belonged to the NAACP. That's what he looked up to. And so get this, here's a man who is the product of the hard work and determination and the Christian culture that existed in the South. That is the culture that existed, that produced Martin Luther King. He was born in Atlanta, Georgia. He says himself that the family unit in which he grew up in was intact. He never wanted for anything. Everybody got along. It was all good. So that's the culture that produced him.
Yeah. He
rejected that culture and decided to embrace the NAACP culture of this agitative, hyper intellectual, talented nonsense. That's what he embraced. And so by the time he goes to university, he embraced Marxism. One of the pastors who, after Martin Luther King died, he wrote a book called Black Theology, I think is the name of it. I forget the name of it, but his name is James Cone. He's a father of liberation theology. He says that Martin Luther King talked about his Marxist ideology in private with his staff, but he knew better than to talk about it in public because he knew that Americans by and large rejected communism. So he was a deceptive man who took advantage of Black people for his own sinister goal, which is to rein in socialism, particularly with Blacks, and then into America at large. We researched this stuff heavily, and we didn't go looking at what somebody else's commentary was. No, we read his writings and found this stuff to be true.
What a mess.
Right.
That's amazing. I didn't know all that. I knew a lot about him. I've learned over the years, but I didn't know that. Do you know what made him, since he grew up in an intact family, Christian family, all that, what made him change his mind? Was he traumatized? What made him decide to go away from that to being such a liberal?
The only traumatic moment that I know of with regard to Martin Luther King is he and his brother were playing upstairs when they were kids, and his grandmother lived with them. And he was running, and his grandmother was on the edge of some stairs, and he accidentally bumped into her, and she fell down the stairs. And so whenever she fell down the stairs and landed on her stomach, he thought that he killed her. And so what he did was he climbed to the roof of his house and was about to jump off to kill himself, which that's not going to kill you, but okay. Um, and so all of a sudden, his brother came running outside and said, "Hey, she's okay. She's up. She's walking." And then he came down off the roof, and vowed to take care of his grandmother until she died. So that's the only, I guess, traumatic experience that I can point to with regard to why he would end up going the way that he did. But I don't think that there's any meat to that theory. I think what it was is that Martin Luther King fancied himself as an intellectual. He believed he was an intellectual. He says in his papers that he was always smarter than his classmates.
Oh,
And so the thing about intellectualism is that it goes back to the Garden of Eden,
yeah.
when Satan tempted Eve and said, "You'll be like God, choosing for yourself what is good and evil, or knowing what is good and evil." So it's man's desire to be God. We reject God's means of salvation. We reject God's authority in terms of how we ought to live and how we ought to treat our neighbor. Jesus said that the command I give you is to love God and to love your neighbor as yourself. So we don't, when it comes to like treating your neighbor well, we shouldn't look to Martin Luther King. We should look to Christ, because he's the one who said it first.
Yeah. Yeah.
But all that to say, the reason why King went the way that he did is because he believed that he was the smartest man in the room, and the people that he looked up to as far as his intellectual heroes were people like W.E.B. Du Bois. He wanted to be like them. He wanted to be the leader of Black people, and that's the reason he went the direction he went into. He rejected Booker T. Washington's model of, regardless of where your circumstances are, work hard, take care of your family, be a man,
Yeah.
and go get it. And when you do that, nobody can say anything negative about you. And if they do say something negative about you, who cares?
Right. It just roll off your back.
Right.
That's amazing, man. A couple things about that is I wondered why, if Martin Luther King was so conservative, why was his wife so liberal? Because I know that Coretta Scott was like off the chart with liberalism. She believed in abortion and everything else.
Yeah.
And
So
I
did Martin Luther
wonder,
King.
why did he have such a liberal wife? You said Martin Luther King supported abortion as well?
Yeah, he did. He received an award from Planned Parenthood.
Oh, yeah.
And on the inscription of that award, they compared him to Margaret Sanger. And he had a opportunity as a pastor to say, well, no, I reject that. I don't believe that my people should be getting abortions. He had the opportunity to do that, but no, what did he do? He said that I will cherish this award as one of my favorite possessions until the rest of my days. So that was his reception of that reward. He knew what Planned Parenthood was doing. The Planned Parenthood model started as a Negro project, and Margaret Sanger, how she felt about Blacks is well documented. You talk about it all the time.
Yeah.
I don't need to repeat it here. But yeah, it's interesting because the point that you make about Martin Luther King being a conservative, there's no evidence of that at all.
Right.
And to the extent that he was a conservative, most of his speeches wasn't even written by him. They were written by a man named Bayard Rustin. They were written by who else? Clarence B. Jones, Stanley Levison. All of these men are communists. And in order to understand why communist men would write conservative rhetoric, it goes back to the Communist Manifesto. What they do is called utilitarianism, meaning they're willing to blend in and to use familiar language that everybody is comfortable with as a deceptive tool. And the idea is that once I can deceive you, I can then get in and win your trust and manipulate your worldview in such a way that all of a sudden you believe what I believe and you don't even know how you got here. It's kind of like, for example, if you are a single man and you're dating, right?
Yeah.
Let's say you're a wealthy man, you're dating, and a woman wants to get with you, but you don't know whether she's a gold digger or whether she loves you for you.
Right.
And so she puts on makeup, she dresses a certain way, she puts on her perfume, she does all the things, and she makes you believe that she really wants you, but really she's after your money.
Yeah.
And so because you want to believe that, you're the best thing since sliced bread. You want to believe that you're God's gift to humanity. You fall for her tricks and her lies to where all of a sudden she's taking you for everything you have and you don't know how you got here. So that's the way deception works. I'm going to tell you all the things you want to hear. I want to use familiar language, use familiar symbols, and all of this is devised and calculated in such a way to have some kind of ulterior to accomplish some ulterior goal, some ulterior motive. That's the reason why communists had their hands in women's suffrage, the civil rights movement, gay liberation, Black Lives Matter, every social justice movement that dates as far back as the early 1900s. The communists had their hands in it. And they want to make you believe, particularly as it relates to women's suffrage, that, oh, this is about women's rights. This is about, liberating women from the slavery of being a wife and treating everybody equally. What was their real goal? Their real goal was to expand the power of the government by taxing everybody, because at one point, only men were taxed. They wanted to tax everybody. And not only that, but they knew that the mother in the home was the safest thing for children, for child rearing. Yeah. Because in the biblical context of the home, you have the father, you have the mother, and you have the children. And when you take that mother out of the context and you make her a breadwinner too, and you have both father and mother working, what then becomes of the child? Oh, the government comes in and says, well, we'll take care of the child. Let's push Head Start. Let's subsidize daycare. Let's enforce public school. Because people think that public school, like we've always had public school and it's always been, this thing. But the reality is it's a fairly new phenomenon. Anyway, so part of the women's suffrage movement was to totally restructure the family unit.
Yeah.
And as a result of that, a lot of the things that has happened has simply been no good. So